Everyone, thanks for coming back. Right, we're on to the final straight, nearly there, and then we can all get off on our trains and planes and automobiles. We're going to finish off with some really good couple of sessions with some excellent speakers. Before we do that, I've just got a bit of housekeeping actually. Has Paul Haynes from Trafalgar House made it up here yet? Are you in the room, Paul? Okay, well, Paul's not in the room. So I was told last night that Paul is retiring this year, and that this is his 28th of the last conferences that he's attended. So it's not going to be the same next time without him, is it? When you see him downstairs, tell him that annual conference, we're going to miss him. It's going to be a shame he's not with us. And we should say thank you and congratulate him for managing to make so many of those conferences. So I've done a call out. All you've got to do to get a call out is keep coming to conferences, and then when eventually you retire, we'll give you a call out as well, as long as you've been to enough of them. Okay, so two great sessions to finish us off. We're going to begin with Gina Miller, who's going to come up and talk to us for a while, and then there's going to be questions and answers afterwards, so start thinking of your questions. A couple of things about Gina. Come on up, Gina. First of all, I love your Twitter handle, that Gina Miller, as if we didn't know. Gina actually has been a transparency activist for all these years, but the thing you might not know about Gina is that she played cricket for Bexhill Ladies as well. Okay, so you're going to talk to us for about 20, 25 minutes?
Yep.
Brilliant, thank you.
Shall I go to the mic?
Yes, whenever you.
Okay. Good morning, and first I want to thank the PLSA for inviting me to speak today. Many of you may know about my campaigning, the True and Fair campaigning, and what we've been calling for in fees, so I'm not going to talk to you about that. Because I think in the interview you may well have quite a few questions. I wanted to give you a talk about a bigger picture as I see it, and just give you some background of where I came from, why I did what I did, and where I see things going. And I mean, I landed on my feet 22 years ago when I started my specialist financial services marketing agency. And through a sort of combination of hard work, amassing experiences, confidence, it's allowed me to be in a position where I have the resources to follow my passions, to challenge the status quo, question where outcomes are benefiting communities, and if institutions are indeed fit for purpose. A passion to plant, you would call it, to metaphorically plant a tree under whose shade I will never sit. My championing has been reactive, responsive to opportunities that have fallen to me, or where I have seen dishonesty, lying, or skullduggery. I am no braver than the countless people who hold authority and unfairness to account every day in thousands of different ways. But I learned the power of forensic thinking through my law studies, and the power of communicating in simple, understandable, direct manner, a manner in which you can expose the Alice in Wonderland rhetoric and shake the trees so that truth falls out. The historian Professor Richard Evans, now president of Wolferson College at Cambridge, wrote a book called In Defense of History, which perhaps with a premonition of the era we are about to enter, was the first to defend the discipline of objective thinking, fact-finding, and research, and second, to dismiss relativism. His book is a manual of the rejection of fake news and the assault on expertise. It was interesting to me to see the parallels between an historian's approach to a set of facts and my own campaigning approach. In many ways, they're similar. An honest campaigner and an honest historian, obliged by different sets of rules, have the same respect for the underlying facts and notions of objective truth. Professor Evans wrote of objective truth as being where there are many ways of interpreting things, but where facts are established on fact, on data, and on unemotional truths. In my court case, I'm sure that as most people who've studied law have found, learning constitutional law was the highlight of my studies. It was functional but also foundational in its aspect because it's the bedrock of where we all sit. The case you all know about that I started in June 2016 went to the Divisional Court and then the Supreme Court. 8 members of the 11 Supreme Court found in my favor with 3 dissenting judgments. Both the Divisional Court and the Supreme Court held that because the inevitable effect of triggering Article 50 was that we would leave the EU and thereby lose rights conferred on us by statute, particularly the European Communities Act of 1972, that exercise would lose rights for individuals and therefore had to be granted by an act of Parliament, not by the royal prerogative. I put on notice the government that that will also be the case at the end of the negotiating process, where there will have to be another act of Parliament because rights will be definitely lost. The royal prerogative and the separation of powers were the 2 main constitutional principles in my case, but a third, the independence of the judiciary, emerged due to the outrageous attacks on the members of the judicial court, both in Divisional and Supreme Court. While many citizens will have recoiled in disgust at the Daily Mail's "Enemies of the People" headline, it is the legal profession, judiciary, that are most fearful. Regrettably, it seems as if what we saw there is just an outlier of what has become more mainstream. The attacks on integrity of anyone who speaks from experience or expertise seems to be gathering traction across the world, not just in the UK. Rather than retreating from the face of public outrage, we have to stand up. We have to confront what we see is going on. While the vote on triggering Article 50 was voted through pretty easily by what I feel is a very supine MPs, it left many people asking what was the point of the case. I think my resistance has contributed, at least in part, to those same MPs now asking more questions. The arguments over a meaningful debate on the final deal are also, I think, partly due to the precedents in the case and the judgments themselves. I hope that my explanatory value in a single citizen standing up to the power of government, to standing up when you see something wrong, to stand up and use your voice so that you can create change, is something that you and everyone will take some comfort from and follow. But there is a price. I think my actions in the face of vitriol, particularly from certain Brexit press, an extreme misogyny and racism, a testament that we need to stand up and we need to say that all is not well. But most ambitiously, I think we have to reclaim expertise. We cannot exist as a society in an expert-free zone. We have to trust facts, and we have to be able to know that other people trust them too. What we are seeing most obviously in the US is worrying for us all. Not just from the fake news, but actually from the overuse of executive orders, the politicizing of the Supreme Court, an attack on other organs of state. Judicial independence, truth, is being threatened around the world, in countries like Poland, Hungary, Israel, even the Maldives. In Poland in particular, we are seeing a more regressive attitude to a judiciary and free speech. So when this trend of growing executive power is combined with poisonous discourse, as we've witnessed with the judges, civil servants, and experts, there is a danger that we are about to go down a path of tyranny. Timothy Snyder, in his brilliant short book on tyranny, 20 Lessons for the 20th Century, he remarked that the Daily Mail headline about the enemies of the people was a Stalinist term taken from the show trials in the 1930s. He sees this as part of a language of something he calls eternity politics. Politics that leads to a world in which the spinning vortex of cynical myth makes us eventually able to do harm to each other, to discriminate, to kill each other. He concludes his book by saying that if people do not begin to make a defense of history and a defense of society and a defense of democracy, there will be a void in which tyranny will reign. In this context, my interventions will continue. Thank you.
Okay, so start thinking about your questions. I'm going to come to the auditorium first of all. We'll have a look on the app as well, see if we've got some questions, but I'm going to begin with one. So these attacks on truth, where do you think they come from? Why did they start? Why are we so distrustful of the truth now?
It's actually not a particularly new phenomena. And if you look through history, every 100 years or so, we've seen this happen. And it tends to be at times where people are unhappy and they don't trust institutions because institutions have been irresponsible. And you could argue that the threat on truth is because we have been lazy, all of us. Our institutions and all of us, we forgot to listen to other people who were hurting. And they distrusted us, and they distrusted everything we say. So there became this belief that why should they listen to us? Truth doesn't matter from us anymore. And unfortunately, we've also got the internet, which I know you heard a brilliant speech this morning, but social media, to my mind, has created the ghettoizing of minds, where people just listen to the voices that agree with them, and they don't exercise their debating or their ability to understand the other side of the argument. So we have that added element to it that has not existed in the past, that ghettoizing of minds. It means that people just don't trust what they see from those sources that they should trust.
Social media echo chambers, yeah, absolutely. But then, I mean, trust is really, really easily lost. How do we go about regaining it?
I think we're in a really difficult place because there's a new term being spoken about called deep fake, where now you can actually change people's photographs. It actually came from the porn industry, believe it or not, which many things do, from a technology point of view, where it's going to become more and more difficult to know what is true, what someone's saying if they were really there. You can tag someone's face and put them somewhere else. It is actually going to become more and more difficult. But I think, to my mind, that it needs to start from children, from parents, from conversations we have at every level of society, where we actually trust each other, and then we can question. Because when you see somebody face to face, you can actually tell from their facial, I mean, it's much easier to tell if they're telling the truth or not. So perhaps in an odd way, we need to have more personal conversations rather than virtual ones.
Which I think it actually is a comment made by a lot of politicians, isn't it? Politicians en masse aren't trusted, but you get them in one-to-one into a room and people say that they like them and trust and believe what they've got to say.
Well, I think politicians aren't trusted because most of the time they don't say what they believe. But that's a different matter because they're whipped so mercilessly. But I think when you do get them on a one-to-one, they then tell you the truth. But what we need them to do is do that in public.
So we've got to get this conversation going, which obviously in a political context is not something that happens very often these days, although some people do it. For the lesson that we can learn as an industry, we have a lot of people who mistrust pension saving, long-term saving. They think that they're all being ripped off behind the scenes. How are we going to regain that trust? We can't do it on a one-to-one basis. No,
but I think the things that the asset management pension industry have is we still have the legacy of being financial services. So we are tarred with the brush of being financial services and their financial crisis, even though it's 10 years ago. We still have that tainted brand. And we have to go, in my mind, we have to go the extra mile. We have to go out there and say, take ownership and say, okay, we got things wrong in the past, but this is what we're doing to put our house in order. We have to be much more proactive, I feel, in defending what we do and explaining our value and our societal value, because as an industry, you know, we have to explain to people that no government of whatever colour is going to be able to afford the ageing of the population, and that we sit almost as a vocational industry, a societal industry, where what we do is helping people. So we need to explain that, and I don't think we've done that in a way that resonates with people.
Okay. Okay, so some good lessons to learn there. So who's got a question in the auditorium that they can ask us? Okay, so we've got one right at the back there. If you can tell us who you are, please, sir.
My name is Michael O'Sullivan. I'm a pension trustee. Gina, why do you think the discourse about Brexit is so negative? For example, nobody ever talks about the freedoms that the general public enjoy in terms of being in membership of the EU. People can travel, people can move house, people can buy property, people can go and live in the sun, people can go and take up employment. And to me, it's almost as if people don't realise some of the things they're going to lose, and they won't realise it until it's actually happened. And these things seem never to be highlighted in the debate.
There's something very odd that's happened in the debate, is that there is a crowding out of voices that are sensible, common sense, like you said, which seems to be highlight the good things that a membership of the EU means. But I think it's almost become, the only way I describe it is it's almost become like the cult of Brexit. There's a sort of cultishness about the attitude and the conversations. But it is dawning on people. I think it is starting to come out of what it means. But also, I referred to the laziness before. I think we were pretty lazy in knowing anything about the EU. We don't actually teach it in schools. We've never really understood what this thing is. You know, the ordinary person speak, we've just never done it, and we've allowed politicians to use it as a whipping horse every time they failed in their policies. And that's, I'm not just saying one government, but successive governments have done that. And it's almost, we have very little time now to defend it or to explain the good things about it, because not everything is good, but there are invaluable, in my mind, and as you've just listed, things that we won through membership. And, you know, we were called the poor, dirty man of Europe before we joined, and our membership, we are where we are because of our membership, not despite it. What really concerns me is we only have 6 to 7 months left, because once we reach October and the ratification process started, we have gone. So we have very little time to have those conversations. But I do think we can. It's very difficult in media where the media, for whatever reason, have decided that, you know, as a Remain voice, or even if you're a Remain and Reform voice, whatever you are on the rainbow of Remain, as I call it, you're allowed a soundbite, but no real conversation, no real debate. So I think it's going to be really tough to do that, to explain membership. But I think we have to do it in conversations, in businesses. As an industry, I have no idea why the industry has been so quiet about the loss of passporting. It just makes no sense to me whatsoever. We should have, from day one after the vote, be explaining to people about passporting. There was a House of Lords, I don't know if you saw this, there was a House of Lords report that was published in February of last year, where they, after all the evidence they took from over 200 odd companies, they said, the financial services industry does not understand what passporting is. That's a shocking revelation or conclusion for them to have come to. And we may have left that too late. I think we are definitely losing passporting, and we won't get it in a deal because of one thing that's very important. The EU is not just negotiating with the United Kingdom. If we are given a special relationship and a special deal, other member states may want that. And also, if we're out of the EU, other WTO countries may want those deals too. So the EU is negotiating with almost the whole world through us. And that is something that seems to have been lost on many politicians. Sorry, that's a very gloomy thing to say, but that's the reality of it.
Okay. So Leslie, we'll go to Leslie first of all. Sorry, John, we're doing diversity this week. And every other week, actually.
and on that theme, and on that theme, firstly, I'd like to congratulate the PLSA team on achieving gender diversity on stage throughout this conference, which I know is a very, very hard feat. Gina, what do you think that gender diversity can add to the debate on pensions and investments? And while we've got you here, what's the one thing that you'd say to the women in the audience to encourage them to step into the limelight?
I think, as in any other industry, I think the diversity brings a completely different culture to an industry. And it also creates a different face for consumers of that industry. And, you know, we have, as you well know, you know, diabolically low investments and savings from women in the UK. So, you know, to be able to see women in an industry that is defined as a brand that's male would be extremely positive. As in what should women do, I'd say 3 things. One is, every woman in this room, if you ever knock on a door, don't say sorry. The first word that comes out your mouth must not be sorry. You are not to apologize to be where you are. You are exactly where you should be. Secondly, don't go and sit in the back of conferences or wherever meetings, put yourself at the back of a room. Sit in the middle of the room because you should be in the middle of the conversation. And thirdly, I'd say, when you are successful, don't be harsh. Don't be a queen bee. You need to be a mentor to younger women. Don't forget where you came from. You've got to get other people up that ladder too.
So if there are any ladies sitting at the back, feel free to come forward. So we'll go to John next, and then we've got Charlotte at the back afterwards.
Gina, hi. I mean, personally, I think Brexit is the biggest disaster this country has ever incurred, certainly since the Second World War. John Major and Tony Blair, different parties, saying the same thing. Is there any chance, from your perspective, that there is going to be a second referendum on the actual terms so people can take a vote on reality rather than fake news?
I think it's the only option is a people's vote. Referendum does not score with anybody. So but a people's vote on the final options is the only way out, I believe, politically as well, because you've got 2 main parties that are divided. And why are they going to take the blame for what happens? You know, so it's an easy out if they say, well, the people can take the blame. Because, you know, on one side, you've got the Labour Party who want a referendum because they can say then it's not our fault because of what they really think behind the scenes. And then, the Labour Party who want a general election, and the Conservatives who may back a referendum. I think it's possible, and there's something happening in the House of Lords which is very interesting. In the withdrawal bill, when it was going through the Commons, the MPs didn't notice something in Article 7, which was an amendment to the 2011 European Act. The 2011 European Act says that if there is a treaty change, which us leaving or any form of modification of our membership would be a treaty change, there has to be a referendum. All treaty changes have to have a referendum. They didn't spot that, so they passed it. I'm very good at getting lawyers to work for nothing. Through a group of pro bono silts and lawyers, we prepared a note and we've circulated it to the Lords, who have now, Lord Adonis has laid down an amendment to say that article must not go through. If that is kept on the statute books, there has to be a referendum. But I think there is also more and more, even if that did happen, there is more and more realization that the will of the people started this, and the will of the people should actually decide where it ends. So I'm going to be putting, as so many other people are putting our energy into calling for a people's vote in autumn sometime, because it's got to be, as I said earlier, before ratification.
So one of the questions we've had through the app is, well, verbatim, do you believe in democracy?
I absolutely agreed with in democracy.
So where we are is slightly, you know, I'm with John on this, I'm a Remainer, but there is this accusation that we had a referendum, the referendum result was 52% in favour of Brexit, and if we ask for another referendum, or if we put it back to the people, isn't that in some way anti-democratic?
I didn't know that democracy was one day, one vote. The whole point of democracy is to carry on in the face of contemporary issues, to consult with the people. That is what democracy is. It is about either consulting with people directly or through their representatives in Parliament. If you decided, if there was a law, I don't know, brought in 6 years ago that women couldn't come back to work for 6 months before, you know, whatever the law was, and you say, well, that's once, we've done it once, we can't ever review it. That is not how democracy works. It is not one day, one time, one vote. It is a vote when you see the contemporary issues.
Okay. Charlotte.
I'm just going to add to your advice, always wear a red jacket. I wanted to just pick up on what you were saying about the financial services industry being so silent and how frustrating that is. But I think from my conversations with people, there's been a sense of frustration that every time they put their head above the parapet, whether you're in the pensions industry or the banking industry, you're just viewed as greedy bankers and we don't need them anymore. So I think that the financial service industry, to allude to what you said before about being tarred by that global financial brush, I think that's carried over, and I think that has shaped why the industry hasn't reacted the way it has, because it's just got sick of being called the bad guys. Do you agree with that or disagree?
I think it's going to be tough to get back a tainted, you build up a tainted brand, to you know, take the rust off and shine it back up is hard. But what is the alternative? So I think you've got to do that hard work. We've got to go out there and be more proactive in universities, in schools, in communities. Because actually, getting back to the diversity question earlier, we have as an industry a real problem of diversity when it comes to ethnic minorities. And part of that, because I speak at a lot of events with young people, is that they think culturally, their parents don't want them to go into an industry that is seen as being, it's where you rip people off, as if you like. So there is a cultural barrier, not from the industry recruiting from ethnic minorities, but actually them wanting to come into our industry in the first place. So that, you know, we've got to resolve that. But I think we have to do the hard work. We have to explain what it is we do. Some of it is the language we use. We're not very good at actually explaining what it is we do. We don't tell the story of the industry and what we do. So that might be some of the things that we could consider.
And that's been picked up in, again, one of the online questions. And picking up on the theme of echo chambers, the accusation is that we tend to spend a lot of time talking to ourselves in language that we're used to, as opposed to looking outwards to the world and trying to engage with them. How can we best engage with people to try to earn their trust?
I think part of it is actually being humble and saying, we did get things wrong, and these are the things we're going to do to put what we got wrong right. And by doing that, you have to show some humility before you can start rebuilding. But to my mind, it is about conversations in school. I mean, we might have lost, you know, you could argue that we've lost the one generation, but what about the next one? And I don't think we do enough work in universities in particular, because I think there's an easy win there, because there have been programs in schools. If you want a quick win, to me, universities is when people are going to first time come into real understanding of money, their own money and budgeting. So why not in that first year, for example, a very practical suggestion is that they have quite light demands. So why not put in modules on finance, on APR, on mortgages, you know, actually teach that the first year, because also the people at universities are likely to be the employers of the future. So you kill two birds with one stone. So I just think as an industry, for example, if we could come together and have an industry-wide, say, sponsoring of something like that, then you start building people's trust, so you're actually giving something back. You're actually doing something that's not just about earning money for yourself. It's about giving back, and I think that would be quite an easy win to do.
I've got 2 children at university, and I'm not sure they'd agree that their first year is light going. I mean, there's pubs, there's clubs,
Well,
there's...
yes.
Anybody else got a question out there? Otherwise, we'll go back to the app again. Come on, you're a shy lot. Okay, so...
There's a gentleman.
was there a chat? Ah, good, right, one in the middle there. Thank you.
Richard Morello, I'm a pension trustee. I have a degree in politics and an interest, and I know there are exceptions, but it's my perception that over time the quality of politicians has declined. And one of the reasons is, A, they can earn a lot more money going to the city, and that they don't get attacked in the same way as you in fact described. I'm not certain why people would want to go into politics these days, because you get attacked in the press, you don't get paid very well, and there's not a lot of upside, and you have to bare your soul. So my perception is that part of the problem we have is a lack of quality of the people who are representing us. And I don't know how we get out of that vicious downward spiral.
So when you answer that question, bear in mind that at least 5 of the questions on the app have been, would you consider standing for Parliament?
I'll answer that question. It is, being a politician is a terrible job. Because you are attacked, and a lot of the responsibility lays at the door of the media. There is something significantly wrong with our media and the way that the people in public life are attacked. I should know. We have to have, I mean, I believe actually we need Leveson too, but that's a whole different conversation. But I think one of the consequences, there are actually some interesting consequences I think that will come out of Brexit or where we are today, whatever happens. And I think one will be people's engagement. People have in the UK in particular, have not talked about politics or the constitution or the law like they've done in the last 2 years. They just never engaged in that. And I know from going around to universities and schools that they're excited now and they want to get involved. And it is actually not about wanting the money. So there are better statespeople, men and women, who are coming through, who really are going to do it for the right reasons. So I do think the career politicians we can see a decline in, and I'm hoping, I'm positive about this. The second thing I think that will happen is we'll see more localism. And that's a different type of politics, actually. And I think localism is good, not just from the point of view of policy making, but also from finance. And we have to break this London bubble, or how people view us as almost a different country in Westminster or in London. And so I think because of a bandwidth issue, there will necessarily be more localism. And that will be a positive thing, because then people can get involved in politics in their own community. And then they can build that trust from there. But there is definitely a trust deficit in the political world as well. So I think, and the other thing I think will happen as an unintended or intended consequence, unintended probably, is I think we'll probably see a codification of some parts of our constitution. So there are positives, whichever way this comes, that I think will happen. Would I become a politician? So,
well, you might well already be a politician.
I'm on a political platform. I mean, I've actually been, before this case, I have been very much behind the scenes involved with Hansas, looking at how the erosion of the constitution and parliamentary sovereignty has been sitting with the executive, because it didn't happen with just this government. You know, governments have been using royal prerogative powers, Ponsonby rules. There's all sorts of ancient, you think, things that would never exist today happening. And the way money is allocated, these things have been happening now for a good decade or so. So I'm interested in how we get better politics, but I can do it much more effectively by being independent, because I would refuse to be whipped. Some politicians might like that, but I would never last 5 minutes, because I would never be whipped. And so as an independent, I could be much more successful. And all the people running around thinking the answer to where we are is a new party don't understand our political system. So I just feel that new party or me going to politics is not the right thing. I have no intention of stepping back, but I can do it in much more effective ways from an independent voice, I believe.
I mean, the system's always been open to abuse, isn't it? What with rotten boroughs from many, many years ago, so there's always been some abuse of the system. So do you recognise that your actions are undermining the ability to get the best possible Brexit deal?
I don't see the connection at all, because the negotiations that are being done have nothing to do with my case, so I don't really quite understand where the connection would be. What might have undermined the negotiations is if the government had triggered Article 50 using the royal prerogative, which was contrary to Article 51, which was contrary to our constitution, and then we would be out, goodness only knows what would have happened if that had happened. No, I mean, it is too terrible to contemplate. So that would have been pretty bad for the negotiations, I believe.
I guess the question is hinting at the undermining of potential undermining of our negotiation team. So we've got a team out there who can't actually broker the deal because they've always got to defer to Parliament.
No, they don't have to. They have to defer to Parliament at the end of the process. They don't have to defer to Parliament now, and they're not.
No. But
I mean, they're not. They have to share with MPs what they're negotiating, but that's not being undermined by them sharing it. I mean, they're not sharing it with the public. Some people argue they should be. I actually think that Mrs. May, if she can achieve what she said in her speech on Friday, she will go down as being one of our greatest prime ministers. So I think she should be left to go away and see if she can broker that deal. But if she cannot, then the people deserve a vote. And that is where I think we are.
Okay. Anyone else out there? So we've got one in the middle just there.
Hi, Rod James, Private Equity International. Do you think that moral hazard created by a lack of accountability post-crisis, specifically a lack of prosecutions, created this, led to a large degree to the decline in trust in experts, and also maybe created a certain sort of self-destructive impulse that may have led to where we are today?
I do think that people, and I talk to a lot of different people who believe in the community, believe that nobody was hung out to dry, that nobody was blamed, and that everyone seems to have got away with it. I think the second biggest thing that I say is not helping. So I agree with you that nobody was found guilty, if you like. I remember one person saying to me, even if they weren't found guilty, maybe that everyone should walk around in an orange jumpsuit, those who were guilty for a while, then at least we knew who they were. But it's also because we are still lying to people. You know, through my True and Fair campaign and what I've been doing on fees and costs, when closet indexing, all these sorts of things, why are we not clearing out our own skeletons? We shouldn't be waiting for other people to discover them. If we know these things are going on, we should sort them out and get on with what we should be doing, which is building a brand that is trusted as a sector. But so some of the blame, we've dragged our feet for too long as an industry in putting the things that are wrong right, because now, how are you going to turn around? Article 24 in MiFID II is something that we drafted, so I know exactly what it says. But the 3rd of January has come, and where the compliancy isn't there. Just get on and do it. So then you can go but look at creating better products for better outcomes. I just don't understand why the industry doesn't understand that if somebody has been paying 1%, thinks they're paying 1% and they've really been paying 3%, and you've lied to them for 10 years, now you have to tell them the truth. What do you think they're going to feel? So you've actually created some of the own problems, that the industry has created some of its own problems, and rather than, it was the year 2000 that the FSA wrote the first report, commissioned a report on hidden fees and charges, and found that up to 50% is hidden. We're 18 years later. This should not have happened.
So we are almost out of time. I'm going to ask you 2 more questions. So we'll try and keep it brief if we can. First from me and the second off the app. First one from me is, whether we agree or disagree with your politics or your position, one of the things I think we must all admire about you is how you've managed to stand up against the waves after waves of opposition, and some of it quite vitriolic and unpleasant. I mean, where does that come from? How do you do that?
Well, to show you how much, I am looked after by the terrorism squad, and every part of my life has changed, and I don't really go much out anywhere. Yeah, I live with, you know, what's really sad, and I know Laura's coming up next, is that you take it, it becomes part of your life. I expect death threats every day. You know, a Viscount went to jail for taking a bounty out on my head for £5,000, someone to run me over. I will not let those people win. What they don't realize is that they give me more power. They give me more energy to stand up for what I believe is right, because I do not want to live in a world where their voice trumps mine.
Okay. And in a much, much smaller way, I think that's a lesson we have to learn as an industry as well. You know, the members of this association, I believe, are a force for good. We want to try and improve things. Okay, so the last question from the app, and you mentioned Laura's in the audience and going to be coming up in a second. So this question is, do you believe the BBC is unbiased?
Laura? Well, I'll answer that question a different way around, in that I think the BBC should not have given Mr. Farage as much airtime as they did throughout the campaign. Because that's my personal view. And I think at the moment, there appears to be less time. If you just look at it on a statistical basis, it looks as though Leavers are getting more airtime than anybody on the Remain side. I can't tell you if that's true or not, because I haven't looked at the data, but I read that like everybody else, and that's what's said. And if that's the case, then that has to change.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much, Gina. Just hang on a second. Hang on. Oh, okay. Thank you.